What up, Jose?
What's going on? How are
How
you?
you doing, brother? Just your Mr. Rogers look? It's looking clean, brother. It's like Mexican Mr. Rogers.
It's funny.
Senor Jose.
This is I'm cold in California.
Is it? What is it in Cali right now, bro?
Let me tell you. Weather 55.
All right, yeah, it's a little chilly. So how you doing, bro? How's the week, man? Treating you good?
Yeah, treating good. Good month.
Same, dude. Same. So we have these conversations all the time, me and you, that people don't get an opportunity to kind of be a fly on the wall. So I figured today what we can do is have a conversation that we've actually been talking about a lot lately, not only for ourselves individually, but also for agents, that we work with now in this ever expanding, growing organization that's coast to coast in 15 states and continuing to multiply, is this issue of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And I sent you something the other day that said, in a world of infinite leverage, judgment is very valuable. And first, I think it would be very helpful if we define what we mean by judgment. My definition, which is not mine, I got it from somebody else, is that judgment is really about what's best for the long term. That's the definition of good judgment. What is best for the long term? And I have found, which I believe you have as well, and we constantly keep talking about this, is making decisions, like elongating time horizons and making decisions that are kind of pushed out in terms of outcomes and kind of long-term centered, has really served me and you incredibly well. And what we see happen on a regular basis is that short-term thinking clouds judgment and causes people to make decisions that really don't serve them long-term.
Agreed. And what we talk about as well too is that whenever you see somebody succeeding, that a lot of times it's not one good decision that they made. It's a bunch of little decisions that they've made continually over time. And those little good decisions start to compound in the end. So I think, and vice versa. So meaning if somebody isn't doing as well, you'll notice that it's small decisions that they've been making that have led them to where they are. So I looked up the word judgment on Google, and it says judgment is a decision or opinion made after evaluating circumstances. It could also refer to the ability to make a considered decision. So when I think judgment, having good judgment, it just basically means to me being able to evaluate different situations and then make the right decision. And a lot of times, like Aaron said, it's a decision that is over the long period of time, not thinking about what's good for right now, thinking, okay, what's good for the long term.
Yeah. And what I have found is that, and we can give examples, let's say, in our industry, because I think this topic applies to all things in terms of, am I making decisions that are long-term focused in relationships? Am I making decisions that are long-term focused with money? Am I making decisions that are long-term focused with lead sources?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Am I making decisions that are long-term focused with my body and my health? Right? So this encompasses, pretty much every area in your life. And I have found almost uniformly that by taking a longer view and using the context of what would be best in the long run, it has caused me to be a better decision maker and have better judgment. And now what happens is, as a result, is it's not uncommon that people come to me and you and ask us questions that really pertain to judgment. Like, what do you think would be kind of best here, right? So An example of this would be is, let's say at the beginning of my career and your career, because I know we heard the same information. People were giving us data and they were saying like, yeah, here's how you do business, whether it's open houses, have your name tag on, farm a geographical area. And me and you both took that data and produced very basic outcomes. The reason is because the data is basic. It's not great data. And then we were presented with a different approach that gave us long-term.
So I think Aaron cut out. So I'll tell you guys where like my judgment started to happen, and how I started to develop the judgment aspect of it. So I had my first mentor. His name was Vicente, and he basically approached me at the very beginning and said, "I'll charge you 50% of your commissions, and I'll mentor you." And I said, "No, thank you." Bad decision, by the way. Bad judgment right there. I said, I can figure it out on my own. So I basically went 6 months, no sales. He came back to me and said, look, I'll still mentor you. I'll still charge you 50%, but I'll basically teach you everything that I know. Luckily, the second time around, I was willing to put my ego to the side and said, okay, what do I really have to lose? And the next 6 months, I started to basically I closed 9 deals on the next 6 months. So no deals for 6 months, 9 deals on the next 6 months. So I basically got lucky the first time that I had somebody that was believable that came up to me and asked me to mentor me. Now, what I've learned since then is that if I'm going to allow somebody access to the way that they think, they have to be producing outcomes that I want to receive. So now here's a poor judgment that I see agents make sometimes. They will have a mentor, their mentor will be assigned by their company or by their broker, and their mentor has not sold real estate or has sold maybe like one home in the last 12 months or two homes in the last 12 months or three homes in the last 12 months, or just has never been a top producer, meaning has never sold more than 5 or 10 properties in a year. Now, what I find a lot of times is that agents come in and they're like, yeah, I want to sell 50 homes in a year. But the agent that they're being mentored by has never sold more than 10 properties in a year. So what I tell agents, I'm like, look, it's going to be really hard for that person to teach you how to sell 50, 60, 70, 80 homes if they haven't done it themselves, because the mental map that they have around selling homes is not what is required to sell homes in high volume. So one of the very first things that I did is once I purposely found another mentor, I started looking people up online and seeing if what they were telling me matched up with what they were, what the data signified. So I saw agents find people on YouTube that claimed to be top producers, but then when you looked up their production, they weren't top producers. So I think I started verifying who my mentor was, and I started verifying like if they were actually who they said that they were. So now as it relates to judgment, what I do is I take different advice in different areas from different people. So if I want to become a top producer, I'm going to go to a top producer and get advice from them, or somebody who's been a top producer, but I'm not going to take their face value for it. I'm going to verify the fact that they are who they say they are. And if I can verify it, great, I'm all ears. If I can't verify it, then I proceed with caution, basically.
Yeah, and making those kind of decisions in terms of like what's worth stacking time on top of. So me and you made the judgment of like, hey, learning how to sell, learning AN, learning about time management, learning to be listing focused, learning to kind of create systems so we can create a conveyor belt so we can list property in high volume, we made the decision, the judgment call, that that was worth stacking time on top of. It was better than stacking time on top of open houses. It was better than stacking time on top of, geographic farming. And over time, that proved to be an accurate assessment of reality. That's what allows you to be the top listing agent in your county, in Ventura County, for the last 7 years in a row. It's what allowed me to be a dominant listing agent in my geographic area, listing over 100 homes a year for 10 years in a row, doing 200 deals a year twice. And this is what we mean by judgment. And I think the challenge is, Jose, is that agents are bombarded with information with regards to what's a good use of time. And part of the issue is to your point, it's figuring out who's going to be the guide. Who am I going to go to actually listen as far as what they're telling me is worth stacking time on top of long term. And if they don't have a guide, then they're left to try to piece information together on YouTube. And I see that they end up, oftentimes going for short-term solutions to long-term problems, right? Short-term solutions would be like, getting into bed with these lead sources that are taking increasingly bigger rips on referral fees, where you end up basically working for them, right? Short-term solution would be, perhaps partnering with a team where they're feeding you, which I understand, it's an ecosystem and that sort of thing. But the problem with that is increasingly those agents are just making referral fees when it all shakes out. So, judgment is critical as it pertains to not only kind of being productive in this business, but really getting ahead versus just getting by.
Yeah. And I think part of having good judgment is looking for the truth, regardless of who's giving it to you, and regardless if you like the truth or not as well too. So I think if you're looking for what is true versus how is it being delivered to me, who is the person delivering it to me, and do I like it? So when you said that we wanted to focus on listings based. Now, when I started off as a buyer's agent. Then I started noticing a pattern that all the top agents in my marketplace, that 50% or more of their business came from listing side. Then I was exposed to a world where I started seeing the top producers in different markets, and I noticed that a lot of them were listing heavy. Then I started to collect more information. I'm like, why is the listing side more scalable? Well, the listing side, you have more control of your time. You're able to manage more. You're able to delegate more. You have more control of the inventory. So just a much higher leverage position. So once I found that out, I was like, okay, if I want to become a top producer, then I have to go on the listing side. Regardless, I actually enjoyed, at the very early on in my career, handing people the keys. I really felt like I was like, man, I'm making a difference in these people's lives. It's like their dream. And I felt like I had a little bit more of an impact sometimes, than the listing side. But I'm like, look, I'm not going to reach the goals that I have unless I make the move to the listing side. So did I like the information? Probably not. Was it true? 100%.
Yeah. Another example that pops into my head is when I gave you a bunch of static about presenting with paper.
Yeah.
And you did not like that information, and you pushed back on me and were like, nah, dude, this is just the way I do it. I appreciate the input. And then I just kept kind of, challenging you on it, sort of thing. And then you had one experience. And once you had that experience, then you were like, okay, this makes sense to me. And you started to present with an iPad moving forward, and you haven't gone back since. So I think what you're saying is very true. I think most people aren't actually interested in the truth. They just want to be right. And they get overly emotional about truth, right? Because I think what ends up happening is our beliefs, they make us feel safe. Whenever we hear something that's against what we believe to be true, there's going to be friction, and we're going to push back initially. And it's a lack of clarity that causes that to happen. But then we get emotional about it. And it's unfortunate that that's what happens, because when we get emotional about it, it causes us to not be open enough to actually hear something that's that could be very helpful, and it is in fact true. So one of the things like I really appreciate about our relationship is that, there have been various different times where you've shared something with me and I'm like, nah, dude. And sometimes that might last for a year. Like, nope. Or I've shared with you like about syndications and you were like, nah, dude. And then what happens is like eventually we get back, like pretty much like 95% of the time we see things very kind of similarly. But those 5%, we approach it unemotionally and neither one of us get like upset with each other. It's more like, hey, what we're really after is the truth.
Yep.
It's like independent of our relationship with each other. Like what I really want to know is what's true.
I agree with that 100%. And it reminds me of like, so like I got my broker's license, licensed in 2010, probably got my broker's license in 2012 after only 2 years in the business because I had a 4-year degree. And at some point around 2015, I bought my own commercial building and I was considering becoming my own broker of my company because I wanted to save my money and I thought that was like a higher leverage position. I went to 3 different people that I respected that were already brokers in a world. And I said, hey, look, this is what I'm thinking about doing. They're like, where's your production right now? They asked me, they're like, how much money are you making? How many listings are you taking? And then I told them and they're like, hey, can I be fully transparent with you? Both of their advice, they said, do not become a broker. And the reason that they told me is that they started going into different profit margins that they were earning at that time as a brokerage and all of the headaches that came along with that model. And after they gave me that, I thought about it. I'm like, are they right or are they wrong? Meaning, is this the truth or is this wrong? Now, what I noticed people try to do at that time is that they will try to justify, no, but I'm different. Meaning like I can do things differently. No, that's what worked out for them, but that's not the way that it's going to work out for me. Or I can do better or I can do differently. But once they started going out in terms of margins of profit that they were making, like as a business, and they started going into all the risks that they had to take by signing leases, being the broker of record, the liability that came along with it. I'm like, I may not like it, but this is the truth. There was a time where I was thinking about opening up a property management company as well too. And I called a gentleman by the name of Brian Troop. Brian Troop is one of the OGs of real estate in Ventura County. And he actually had, I don't remember the number, but I heard that he had like something like 30 or 40% of market share of all the agents in Ventura County, bro. So he was like huge and everybody worked for him at some point. And obviously he's a lot older than me. He's got a higher net worth than I do, did very well for himself, owned a real estate brokerage, owned a lending company, owned a property management company. And I went to him and I said, look, I've got a candidate for a property manager that I can bring on that already runs a property management company with probably like 15,000 units in Ventura County. And she says she can run the entire thing because she runs the entire thing right now. And I already own like 57 rentals by myself and my dad owns another 25. I was like, I think it would actually be really good if we bring that in-house and have her manage our rentals as well too, and then open it up. And I told him, I think it would also be a good listing source. And what he told me is like, look, you can do that if you want to, but I wouldn't recommend against it. And then he started telling me all the things that he experienced in running a property management company. And then he explained it to me in a way where he's like, look, there's so many ways to make $1 million. It's not like you can't make $1 million running a property management company. He's like, there's just easier ways to make $1 million without it being as litigious. Like, meaning like, he's like, look, you're going to be having lawsuits all the time. And then I interviewed a property management company and I asked him the same things that Brian told me. So I interviewed like this company called Bay Management. He told me, look, you're gonna be getting a lawsuit every single week. He went over margins as well too, as to what the margins were for a property management company. And at the end of it, I was like, I may not like it. This is the truth. I'm going to not go in this direction. And it's funny because I gave two people that I know the same advice that I was given. I'm like, look, dude, I'm telling you, you do not want to head in this direction because this is the information that I would found. And a lot of the things that I hear is like, I don't think I would be able to live with myself if I didn't try it. Or I don't think I would be able to live with myself if I didn't play this full out.
Yeah.
And it's like whenever you make a bad judgment call, not only is it you tried it out, but now you've lost 5 years of your life. And that sets you back 5 years, where in those 5 years where I stayed away from the brokerage, I stayed away from the property management, and I said, look, this is the bread and butter, selling real estate in high volume. That's allowed me to basically create a moat where I have very good financials now. But it's like it's this it's basically being presented with an opportunity, running it by people that have already been there, not thinking that you're smarter than them, and then basically deciding, okay, is this good? And is this the way? And is this something that I want to do? And if it's not, then just being like, okay, good, and being okay with that decision. A lot of people think that the management of the properties is that they look at it as a way to get additional business, but there's easier ways to get additional business without having to go through the colonoscopy of running a property management.
Well, that and all of the friction.
Yeah.
That's involved. So it's interesting in the sense that like when, and this is what goes be underneath that, like in a world of infinite leverage, you know, that these platforms provide us with, and software and the internet and things of that nature. This is what that means, that judgment is actually really, really valuable. Like what's worth pursuing? I think part of there's two things that come up for me as I hear you talk about this and when we have conversations with people. The first is you clicking your pen, because I can hear that.
Oh, damn.
The second is exactly. He's like, click, 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 click. The second, so the first one is like that. Bro, you were doing it the whole time of the thing too. I'm sure other people are like, bro. So one that comes up is like people confuse like strategy and like who, like a kind of their identity. Yeah. So the strategy being like, hey, what's worth stacking time on top of, versus like, hey, I wouldn't be okay with myself if I didn't give it a try. That's an identity thing. That's an ego thing. And there's nothing worse than watching somebody run enthusiastically in the wrong direction. And then when somebody's like that, because me and you have spoken to those people who call us, by the way, afterwards, a year later, and are like, hey, Roy just put a pen in the thing. It's funny. And are like, yeah, dude, this is not what I thought it was. Like, yeah, we discussed that like 12, 18 months ago. You know what I'm saying? But it's really like an ego thing. It's thinking like, oh, well, maybe they can't do it, but I can do it. It's kind of like somebody pounding on their chest when like the automobile comes out and they're like, I'm going to get into the horse business. And, you know, like, I just wouldn't be okay with myself if I didn't give it a try. And it's like, well, I guess so. But there's this other thing over there. Like you're in the wrong vehicle. I love the spirit, but you're in the wrong vehicle is really the issue. So that's like the first one. The second thing I think is interesting is like believability weighting decisions and people's feedback. So I was on a call with somebody and he was like, yeah, will you hop on a call with this other person so you can discuss kind of models and vehicles, let's call it. And I was like, sure, like we can do that. What I'm aware of though, is that you're going to hear two people that are convinced that they're right. And you have to make the decision which one you're going to believability weight their judgment higher. So meaning like, let's say we're sitting at a table, me and Jose are talking about lending money. We know a little bit about it. We have a little bit of experience. I've done a private money loan once. He's borrowed some money from people. He's, you know, to build stuff. He's done that. So like he knows a little bit about it. But then there's somebody at the table who does $60 million a year of lending. Whatever we think, we're going to believability weight the decision to that person because they just have more experience. in that space. Yeah. So what I was saying to this person is like, look, you're just going to have to believability weight the judgment of these two people because they both are clear and believe that what they're saying is accurate and true. But the foundation of truth is something has to be more true than something else. Yeah. Like truth is on a spectrum. So, people are like, oh, we're going to have to agree to disagree. It's like, no, that's lazy. What's really going on is like people get emotional and they're not willing to continue to triangulate to get to what's more true. Yeah. So what you were saying is like you went to the sources. So you went to a guy who like, did that game to the extreme. And he was like, hey, this is what you may not be thinking. Mm-hmm. I remember before I made the decision, I sold back my interest in an office and made the switch over to EXP. I went to people in the space that I really respected, that had been in the game way longer than me, that had a higher net worth than me, that sold more real estate than me, which is kind of difficult to do. You know what I mean? And I'd be like, look, here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm seeing. You would be doing me a favor, not with ego, not like, hey, prove me wrong. No, you would be doing me a favor if you could point out to me something that I'm missing. Are you seeing something that I'm not? How often do me and you do this, bro?
Well, we do
this all the time, bro. All the time. I will call you up and be like, hey, bro. And then you'll call me up and you'll be like, hey, bro. Like we do this all the time.
And I think the believability part is important. Like looking for people that have a certain area of success. Like, so I'll give you another example. Like I had an advice from an agent, and the agent goes, once you have kids, your production's going to drop. That's what he said to me. But the problem is that agent was not believable, meaning he was not achieving the outcomes that I wanted to achieve. He was a top producer at one time, but his production did not drop because he had kids. His production dropped because the market shifted and he went from an REO agent to a traditional agent, and he didn't make the right shifts at that moment.
And so perhaps he didn't set up systems on the back end at the house and like all this other stuff. Yeah.
So the believability wasn't somebody that I was willing to take advice from. I've mentioned this to you. I was at a family party one time and somebody was trying to give me marriage advice. And I told them, look, I love you. Just because you're telling me this, that doesn't mean that it's true. I'm like, look, there's certain areas where I would take advice from you. I told them I would take advice from you on X, Y, and Z, but there's certain areas that I would not take advice from you on because I don't believe that you're where I would like to be in those areas. He did not like that, but it was the truth as well too. And then even at listing presentations, sometimes like I'll be closing and then I'll ask the seller, I'll be like, look, let's say you get let's say another agent comes and basically they say, look, instead of saying the 950 that Jose's telling you he can sell it for, that they say $1,050,000. Like, what would you do in that situation? They're like, well, I don't know. I'm like, it's probably going to be really tempting for you, right? And they're like, well, yeah, if somebody else is telling us $1,050,000, it's probably going to be really tempting. Okay. So can I share with you something? Or then I ask, is experience important to you? They'd be like, yes. I'm like, can I share with you how to determine how much experience an agent has? Then I go through this process where I show them how to determine how much experience an agent has. So and then I'll be like, let me ask you a question. If the agent who's telling you $1,050,000 has only sold 3 homes in the last 12 months, and the agent that's telling you $950,000 has sold 100 homes in the last 12 months, which agent do you believe would be more likely to be right or more likely to be guiding you in the right direction? And they go, well, the one that's selling 950. And and I'm thinking about it right now, and all that really is saying who's more believable. Who's more believable, basically. And that's what I'm saying. And a lot of times they're like, well, the person with the better track record is obviously more believable than the other individual. So I think if we break it down, it really, having good judgment is really about being a good decision maker. And it comes down to collecting information, and then the information that you collect giving it different weight, meaning like giving more weight to the information that you collect to the people that are more believable in that department, and then using that information to be able to make the right decision. So like, for example, if somebody's telling me like, oh, like this company's better than that company, but that person unfortunately has made poor decisions in their life, and you can tell that they've made poor decisions because they're living paycheck to paycheck and maybe don't even own a primary residence, or don't own, or not don't own a primary residence, don't own any investments, or don't have a high net worth.
Yeah.
Then it's like who's got more weight in the believability, and then using that, even if it's the information that you don't like.
Agreed.
Using
So
that
I,
to
I
make a
was
better
writing down,
decision.
like, as you were saying that, it's like if we were going to put a formula for good judgment, the first formula is you have to collect data.
Collect data. Yep. Agreed.
And what I'm really interested in is I'm interested in like mental maps.
Yeah.
So like maps that are true. And I can get those from various different sources. So examples would be like compounding interest. Like that comes from mathematics, probably like high school algebra. But that is a mental map that you can then take and stack on top of reality to see what's true or not. Another one could come from biology, which is ecosystems, where if you change one thing in an ecosystem, everything changes in response to the ecosystem, right? Another one could be, which we talk about a lot, PLAN, prospect, lead, follow-up, go on appointments, negotiate deals. That is a mental map. Then taking the mental map of, let's say, like millionaires or thousandaires think, what do I need to do? Millionaires think in systems. That is a mental map. So you acquire these mental maps, and you don't need a lot of them. You maybe need like, I don't know, 80 to 90 mental maps. But the goal is to stack those mental maps on top of this thing we call reality, so I can kind of filter through and see what's true. Now, once I've done that, let's say on a particular topic, now I seek out believable people in that space. So I'm like, hey, Jose, you own 57 doors. Here's my mental maps. I'm thinking about doing this investment. Here's my plan. What do you think? And then you shut up. You don't argue with them. You don't fight with them. Bro, I was on a call recently, and this guy was like wanting to fight with me about media. And I'm like, how much money do you make from media? He's like, none. I'm like, so like, why do I imagine that whatever I perceive to be true is true? Because otherwise I'd be producing a different outcome.
Well, not only that, but like as it relates to media specifically, it's also paying attention as well too. Like I notice a trend or a pattern that a lot of the people that were becoming billionaires had a big personal brand on social media. So like if you look at the Kylie Jenners of the world, you look at the Logan Pauls of the world, Jake Paul, you look at the Nelk Boys, you look at Mr. Beast, all of these people are on the path to become billionaires with a B. And what do they all have in common is that they all have large amounts of attention that they have accumulated through social media. And then once they have that attention, they're able to create different things as a result of it. So for that individual to believe that that's not true, there's very good examples of it being true. Hence, people, and it's funny because I've noticed people go from an average life to like a crazy, ridiculous life by getting more attention and blowing up. There was this influencer who bought a house in our area, $4 million, bro, at 20-some-year-old, 22, 23, all from doing videos on YouTube.
But didn't you tell me like he sent over his proof of funds, and you were like, dang?
That's a different one. That's a different one.
Another influencer though sent you proof of funds, and it was like, whoa.
Yeah, and it's like it's a lot. It was a lot more than what I had in the bank. I'll tell you that much.
That's right.
And what was the difference? Was he more knowledgeable? No, he used media to kind of like leverage, you know?
Yeah. So what I wrote down here, so one is collecting data, again, getting mental maps, reading different kind of, reading a lot, seeking out people that have accurate assessments of reality. The way you know they do is because of the outcomes that they produced. The second is surrounding. Then once I come up with something like a vision of how I see it, and once I get certain on it, then I sit down, I seek out believable people that have produced the favorable outcome that I wish to produce consistently over an extended period of time. That is critical. Because what that means is underneath it is good judgment. It also means that there's a system underneath, right?
Yeah.
Then after I triangulate ideas with them, what comes to the surface is the closest thing that I can get to the truth as possible. Now I'm ready to take action, right? And when I take action, then it's just about iterating. You know what I mean? Because when I take action, it'll probably be like imperfect action, and like I'll get feedback, and then just keep iterating it. Like I'm doing webinars now, so like I'm just figuring it out as we're doing it. We just keep iterating and iterating, and it keeps getting better and better and better. But this process is super important. And I think the challenge is, Jose, and I'm curious to see your thoughts on this. Like, I know that the goal and objective is to try to add value to agents. So what most kind of, I don't know, companies do or whatever in terms of their training is they put people on panels or stages that we think are believable, but have not produced favorable outcomes over an extended period of time. And they haven't produced 1% outcomes. And then they tell us things that just are like, you know, kind of super general, like find your magic, or you know what I mean? You're like, what? It doesn't make any sense.
I think it's important. So, like, I looked at this and I said, material possessions does not mean that they're believable.
No.
So, having a Lamborghini does not make that person believable. Having a nice car does not make that person believable. Because, like, and this is funny because when I got started in real estate, there was this guy that was really big on YouTube that was teaching people how to make cold calls online, and I was lucky enough that that person shared the same MLS that I did, and he was claiming that he was selling hundreds of homes a year. So what did I do? I verified to see if he was really selling that amount of homes a year. And once I saw that he was not selling the amount of homes, I noticed that more and more people started calling him out on it. So he started saying that a lot of the properties that he was selling were all off market, that they never came on the market, which is just an additional lie. I mean, you could sell like maybe like 5% of your stuff off market, maybe 10% if you're an agent off market, but 100% of your stuff is it just raises red flags, you know? So what did I do? I just said, okay, like this person has a good ideas, but I don't know if I want this person mentoring me because now I can't trust them. And the same thing happened with a different gentleman that I was hanging out with that had a nice Ferrari. And I went online and he was claiming on social media that his company had X amount of production. And I was out producing by myself the entire company when I did the research. And what did I do? Once again, he became less believable in my eyes because I couldn't trust what he was telling me to be true because he was overinflating
Numbers.
everything. So
Yeah.
what did I do? I just basically made a decision not to allow them not to give them access to my
To your thinking.
thinking, basically.
Yeah, I remember you shared with me that's how you kind of
You.
Yeah, that's how you made a decision that you
I
wanted
verified it.
me
Yeah.
as a guide to help you to list property in high volume. You went online, you looked, you saw, oh yeah, he does sell 150, like 200 homes a year. And then you were like, okay, I need to do whatever I need to do to start to role play with him and start to formulate a relationship.
And once I verified it, I'm like, okay, good. I'm going to be a good student. I'm going to come to this person with questions. I am going to listen to what they tell me. And if they tell me to do a certain something, I am going to do it because he's got the results that I want. And it's funny because my brother-in-law went to a seminar recently, which a lot of people attend, and he comes back and he goes, what do you think? This guy said this to me. I'm like, did you look up his production? And he goes, no, I haven't looked it up. I'm like, okay, let's look it up together. I'm like, okay, he's saying this to you. I'm telling you this. This is the production right here. This is this. And he goes, okay. Comes back and he goes, this other guy told me this. I'm like, did you look up their production? Oh, I haven't. Go look it up and then come talk to me. And then he's running things by me. And I'm like, look, you can do that. But the reality is that, like, because there was this guy that told them, like, hey, look, like, hey, this is how we handle the commission structure now. And he sells like 10 deals a year. And a lot of them, what I told them, I'm like, look, what you also have to pay attention is to where are they getting their deals? like, look, you see this little Zillow badge? That means that they're part of the Zillow Flex account. That means most of their deals are coming from that Zillow Flex account. The leads that you're chasing are a little bit different than these, which means that the approach might vary slightly. So I think just verifying that who you're talking to is really who they say that they are, in a world where anybody can rent out a car, anybody can rent out a plane. And yeah, there's people that have Ferraris, but if you look at where they made their money, they made it on the coaching, not the actual
Not the actual
production,
thing.
not
Yeah.
doing the actual thing.
And this proves what we're talking about. It illustrates it so beautifully well, because here you're, Jaime, who is right next to you, who is the top agent in your marketplace for an extended period of time. Nobody's listed more homes than Jose over the last 7 years in his county. And he's still saying like, oh man, this person told me this. So it just demonstrates how confusing the marketplace can be. And it proves what we're talking about perfectly, where he's going out, he's collecting data, and then people are saying this to him, and he's like, oh, well, what do you think? He's going back to a believable person. You're like, well, let's look it up. Let's look how believable somebody is. It's like when people tell me, they're like, well, your scripts are like wordy. And I'm like, how many homes do you sell a year? Yeah, like, okay. Like I listed 100 homes a year for 10 years in a row, did 200 deals a year twice. So, you know what I mean? So, but it demonstrates perfectly, because here's somebody who has a believable person right next to him. He knows you. He watches what you're doing. He's watching you do it, like literally standing right next to you and watching you do it. And yet he's still potentially influenced by others' kind of thinking, by others' suggestions.
Well, and it was funny because he went to that seminar, and some other guy that we all know was telling him that owning a brokerage was much better than doing the whole EXP model. And his logic was, I could eventually sell the brokerage, basically. And what I explained to Jaime, I'm like, look, yes, he's right. He could sell the brokerage. What I'm letting you know is that in order to grow large brokers, there's going to be a lot of different things that you have to do, meaning you're going to have to sign up for leases. I guarantee you, I told him, I guarantee you, he's probably got at least 4 or 5 different 15 to 20,000 a month leases that he signed up for in those locations. Then I kind of showed him a little graph, and I said, in this graph, I'm like, I'm reading this book, and it's called How to Start, Scale, and Exit a Business. And it talked about the most scalable business. I said, look, what are the least scalable businesses? And it said businesses that have retail locations, basically, like restaurants, brokerages, anything that has a storefront is less scalable. And I'm like, what is the highest scalable? He goes, and it said digital products. I said, so look, you can make, let's say you make $10 million there, but the profit margin is only 10%. You're netting $1 million a year. I'm like, there's different ways to make $1 million that likely have less risk.
Yeah, and all that person is doing, because I was at EXPCon, they asked me to do a talk on media, and somebody literally stood up in the room and was arguing with me. And it was kind of fascinating to observe. I think a younger version of me, the younger, kind of more, I don't know, open to kind of confronting people in that manner version of me would have engaged with that. He wasn't interested in triangulating. He was convinced that he was right and trying to prove me wrong in front of a bunch of people. What it really was demonstrating was his lack of understanding of leverage. And what that person who's standing on a stage saying, yeah, this is better, all he's doing is demonstrating his lack of understanding of leverage, his lack of understanding of the infinite leverage that's available to us right now, meaning the internet, meaning these platforms. He doesn't understand that me and you are actually in the brokerage business, but we have an operational partner, which means we can scale infinitely. You know what I'm saying?
And you don't have boundaries.
No, there's no geographic boundaries.
Yeah, I can partner up with people in different parts of the country. He can't. He could only partner up with people in California.
That geographic area. And and he has all the leverage of labor without the management of labor. He has the leverage of labor and he has to manage the labor. He has the leverage of labor, but he also has to has the capital requirements of labor, where we don't have either one. So like all it is a fundamental lack of understanding of leverage. And for me, I think one of the things that me and you are really aware of, I think as you start to kind of gather mental maps, we both realize that we're wrong. The question is just to what extent. I think if you can really adopt that type of thinking, you'll be a better decision maker. Oh, and also if you can think in probabilities, not exacts. Because I think our tendency is to think like it's like black and white, like something's right and something's wrong. It's actually not what's true. Something's just more right. And I just want to be more right than wrong, right? So if I think in like what's the probability if I do this that this will happen? And a lot of our conversations are like that. I'm like, hey, what's the probability like? And we'll just kind of triangulate, and it'll go both ways. Like, what's the probability if we do this that this will happen? Right? So we are kind of believable for each other and for others, you know, who reach out to us. But like, yeah, so thinking in probabilities, but then also not getting kind of, again, emotionally attached, and recognizing that as I learn more, we realize that we're wrong. The question is just to what extent. And I want to be more right than wrong. That's all. And that's a better way of thinking about it, right? And what I'm aware of, you know, some people, they, and it's unfortunate because a believable person can help you to save like days, weeks, months, decades worth of time running in the wrong direction, right? So it's just finding those individuals, and then like me and you kind of, you know, humbly sitting there and be like, hey, what can you teach? Like when I didn't understand about media, bro, I sat down with somebody that you sat down with, and I'm like, dude, I don't know this. Show me. Or when I kind of embarked down this like attraction game, I'm like, I don't really understand it. I kind of understand it. And I started to gather lots of information, surround myself with believable people. And now, bam, you know, we're one of the fastest growing organizations in the company.
Yeah. I think that also like reading books on certain topics as well too. I think that helps start training. Like I'm reading one called Common Sense Investing by Jack Bogle. And what he's talking about in that book right now is just basically like how it's so much riskier to pick individual stocks than to bet on the market.
Yeah, the index. Yeah.
The index. And he's also talking about how like 80% of the mutual funds that have ever existed, something like that have basically gone out of business, basically.
Yeah. And there's some key mental maps there where he's like, look, you can't control, you can't really pick who the best pickers are going to be because they all revert to the mean.
Yeah.
Only a handful of people that have been able to like beat the market, you know, historically. And it's like, you count them on one hand.
It was like 2 out of 385 funds or something like that.
It's insane. So, and he's like, you can't control any of that, but what you can control is cost.
Yeah.
So if I can keep costs at a minimal, then what happens is over time, because costs compound in the same direction that interest does. We don't think about it that way. So it's funny you should say this, because I was just having a conversation with somebody where, you know, I have somebody in my life who helps me, you know, in that area in terms of like, you know, allocation and taxes and things of that nature. And a lot of people have like money managers who take a percentage, let's say 1% of whatever fees under management. And then that money manager puts them into mutual funds that also has a expense ratio.
Yeah.
So let's say it's 2%, and you're like, it's 2%. Well, what we don't realize is costs compound over time in the same direction that interest does. So over a 30-year time frame, that 2% means the difference between ended up with $1 million or ended up with 600,000. It's an enormous difference, like gigantic. So that mental map though is really critical. And when you realize like Buffett, he made a bet with like hedge funds that he could, that the index, he would invest $1 million and that the index would beat the hedge funds over a 10-year time frame. He won because he understands math. They have to overcome the drag of all their fees and costs, and it's like almost impossible to do. So, but do you see how like by reading that book, now you have like, oh, this is a mental map. And then I can stack that on top of like, oh, like, because when you're young, you figure like, I could do this all myself, whatever. And it's like, well, now that I understand that, like, you know, your thinking changes.
Well, I was even having a conversation with an individual, and he was like, oh yeah, I've got this one stock and it's performing really well. And he's like, and I'm convicted on this stock. So I just keep, if it drops, I just keep investing more in it. And I just thought to myself, he says one thing in the book. He's like, don't look for the needle in the haystack, buy the haystack.
That's right.
Which means that if you just buy the cumulative return of the marketplace and minimize your costs and let it compound over time, you're going to do a lot better than the market in general. And I think also like reading books on finances, like not only looking for believable people, but reading certain books, I think help you with becoming a better decision maker and getting better judgment. And then reading books that like have like opposite arguments as well too. Like, so not only reading what you like, if I read a book on how to run a property management business, they're going to make it seem like, hey, it's like the best thing since cake and ice cream. But like being open to like contradictory opinions and then being like, okay, what is more probable to happen?
You know what I thought? I would be like, nah, bro. You can't say that because you're like, it's the best thing since cake and ice cream. Like, yeah, Jose, it's the best thing since rice and beans. You'll be like, bro, why are you doing that, bro? It's not necessary. It's too funny, bro. No, but you're absolutely right. You know what I mean? Like, and I remember going down that path and reading all those books, and then it became clear to me trying to pick is a loser's game.
100%.
Like 1,000,000%. So then it's like, okay, if I'm going to play in that playground, index funds is the way to go. You know what I'm saying?
Not only that, but the mental time, the energy, the resources, the emotional, like that comes along with that, which detracts you from the one thing that you're doing. Yes. That if you focus on that one thing can actually help you grow.
Which informed my thinking when it came to investing in real estate. It informed like the same kind of thinking informed when I was making a decision about like owning physical assets versus doing syndication. You know what I'm saying?
That book is such a good book. That reversion to the mean thing, he basically talks about like, okay, like the first 5 years, like a fund overperforms in some cases, and then everybody dumps the money into it. And then they did an analysis of the next 5 years, and then it underperforms because it reverts to the means. And it just gives tons of examples of all of these different situations that happen. So can people beat the market? Yes. Can people? And the other thing is confusing luck with skill.
Yeah.
Like I know people that bought properties in 2015 and they sold it 2020, and they think that they're incredibly smart and that they're great at real estate. What happened was that potentially that the market just appreciated over that time. It doesn't mean that they timed the market perfectly. It just means that the market was favorable. So it's like sometimes when people invest in, like people were investing in NFTs and like buying an NFT and selling an NFT or whatever, it was like when everybody's making money, it's easy to confuse luck with actual skill.
And most of it is, I think also because of our natural kind of nature to be prideful, we're lent to believe that it's skill. Like, you know what I mean? Versus, it was just like luck. Same thing happened in real estate in like 2000, I don't know, 4, 5, and 6. Everybody thought they were a genius. But fuck, it wasn't skill. And there's another wonderful book after you read that one called What I Learned Losing $1 Million. And that book should be required reading for anybody that wants to deploy capital, because it's a shame that people who don't mess things up don't like do seminars. Because like you could learn from people how to do something and you can also learn how not to do something, but they're both equally as valuable. So if like there was a seminar, and I know me and you would be in the front row, like how I screwed up my marriage, me and you would be in the front row taking notes because I don't want to do that. You know what I'm saying? I'd be like, shh, you know? But in this book, he describes how he lost $1 million in like a month in like the 80s, which was
a lot of money.
Insane amount of money back then. And he's basically, here's a very good mental map. He said there's an infinite ways to make money. There's only a handful of ways to lose it, and they're almost all psychological. So if you can avoid those psychological pitfalls, then you dramatically increase the probability that you won't lose money, right? And he talks about it there, luck with skill, because during then it was like the roaring kind of period where everything was doing great, and he was just picking, and he thought he was a genius when he was just lucky. And then the marketplace took a shift, And he didn't understand the other thing that's golden from that book is the definition of words. I really do think, Jose, that part of the reason why people don't create outcomes is they don't actually know what words mean. And I don't mean that like they're not intelligent. They just don't know what the root of the word is. So like in the investing space, there's 5 words that you need to be clear on. One is investing. Investing, the definition of investing is the purpose is to not lose money. It's the preservation of capital. That's number 1. Not an increase. It's to preserve the capital with the goal and objective that you will receive it back over an extended period of time in the forms of rents, dividends, and royalties. Now, by definition, right there, that is a long-term thing. Yeah, that's what it actually means. But when people say that word, they oftentimes mean something else, right? So speculating, it comes from the Latin derivative. It means spectare. It means to see. It's like you're seeing something into the future. The only return that you're going to get is if it increases in value. That's to speculate. Trading is where you try to buy for $1 and sell for $3. That's a trade. Yeah.
Like flipping.
Yeah. It's like flipping. That's exactly what it is. So people will say, I'm investing. I'm doing flips. No, you're not. You're trading. Those are 2 different things. Yeah. Then there's betting. Betting is where there's I'm putting a wager on a particular outcome. Yeah. And if that outcome happens, then I receive, whatever the wager is. And then there's gambling. Gambling is actually not about winning or losing. It's about entertainment. And the price for the entertainment is the wager, right? But now that you're clear, once you're clear on what those words mean, you have better mental maps. So people would come to me, Jose, they'd be like, hey, I got X amount of dollars and I want to put it in this whatever coin, right? I'm like, okay. So he's like, yeah, I want to invest. And I'm like, okay, that's an interesting choice of words. I'm going to explain to you what these words mean. Then I'm going to ask you some questions. So I explained to him all the words, right? And I'm like, okay, what is this? Is this an investment where the goal is to preserve capital, where you're going to receive it back in the form of rents, dividends, and royalties? He said, no. I said, okay. Is this speculating, where you're hoping it goes up in value over time? He's like, yeah. Is this betting that this gets adopted or whatever? He's like, yeah. And does it cause you to get a little bit of excitement internally? So there's a little bit of gambling involved. He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. And what percentage of your net worth is this? He's like, well, it's like pretty much all the money I got. I'm like, all right. So under normal conditions, would you bet, gamble, and speculate with all of your net worth? And he was like, no. So I'm like, what do you think you should do? You think you should do it or not? He's like, no. But do you see how, because I read that book, because I had that mental map, because I understood what those words meant, now I have better what? Judgment.
So I think, so if we're coming down to the how to improve your judgment, reading books from credible people that are experts in their field, collecting data, triangulating ideas with believable people, and then asking yourself, what is more probable? And when you're triangulating ideas, give more weight to the individuals that have a better track record in whatever field that they are. It's an example. If I read a book, which I wouldn't, from a guy that he's like, oh, picking individual stocks, this is a key formula, and his net worth is 500,000 or $1 million. And then I got Jack Bogle, who's a billionaire, saying, hey, that's not the right strategy. Who am I going to give more weight to? I'm going to give more weight to Jack Bogle. Here's the other thing too, and this comes down to believable people. When I was building my team, I went to Lars, who basically built a very successful real estate team and then coached real estate teams on how to do the same thing. And he talked about how to structure splits with agents. And what he explained to me, it was like, look, if there's 100% in a pie, right? And you pay, and let's say you assume 30% expenses, just leads, admin, buildings, whatever, that leaves you 70% of the pie. Is like whatever you pay out to buyer agents as splits, whatever you pay, whatever is left over, that's your profit. So if you pay 60% and you have 70% left over, that means you're at a 10% profit margin. So what he made me realize really quickly is for people that are building teams and they had their agents on 80, 90% on their team, there's no way you're going to make any money long term. It's very difficult to do that because he's like, look, if 30% are expenses and now you have your agents on a 40% split, that leaves a 30% profit margin right there. Best case scenario. So what he also made me realize is that some of the teams that were making a profit were because the team leader was still in production, but that if you factored out the team leader's production, the company actually was not profitable because of the splits that he had the other agents on, and that it wasn't a scalable model. But once again, going to believable people, triangulating ideas from them, being like, okay, they've already been down that road. Great. What do I have to do? You know, and then if you have different advice from different team leaders that are like, no, be like, okay, like, what do you make in profit? What percentage do you make? Well, I think no. What do you actually make? Well, last year was a bad year, so I really didn't make very much.
Not what I asked you, bro. It's like, what did you actually
no.
make?
What did you make? It's funny because I'll be on the phone with people and they'll be like, well, I mean, that's not what I asked. I asked this specific, that once again, look, yes or no. Okay. And then that's it, you know?
Yeah, this is awesome. So, you know, again, our intention is to really equip you guys with everything that you need so you can make the best decisions possible, so you can stack time on top of things that will actually produce income for you long term. That's why we're doing the Do More Deal Summit in Fort Lauderdale. It's creeping up here. It's going to be in 2 weeks. We got an amazing lineup for you. We'd love to have you in the building. I'm going to drop a link in the chat so that way, if you haven't gotten your tickets yet, you could get them. You can come up to me, say what up to Jose, say what's up to you know, Ryan Secco, who he's the vice president of Cardone Capital. He's Grant Cardone's right hand man. 14,000 doors under management. It's like a $3 or $4 billion portfolio. We have Pace Morby, the one and only. He's going to be in the room, and you know, teaching us sub 2. He has the #1 creative finance book in the country. We got $1 million panels. I mean, it's going to be dope. So we'd love to have you in the room. Appreciate you guys. Appreciate you showing up. You guys keep showing up. We'll keep adding value. Let's go. Let's grow. We'll talk to you soon.
Later, guys. Bye.